Hello. My name is Tess. They said I was a burden. A parasite. Unworthy of the chair I sat in at my own sister's wedding. And when they told me to get out, I did. Quietly. But 3 minutes later, my husband walked through those doors, and everything they thought they'd buried started to rise. You ever wonder how long someone can stay silent before the truth finds its own microphone? Because what happened next wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming everything they stole, piece by piece. Would you have stayed quiet? Or would you have done what I did? I parked 3 blocks from the oceanfront hotel because the valet line stretched down the street. The sun was just beginning to drop behind the palms, throwing gold over the white canopies fluttering along the entrance. From where I stood, I could hear the faint music of a jazz trio and the hum of laughter, expensive laughter. In my hand, I held an ivory envelope embossed with silver letters, the Valora and Paxton Foundation Charity Gala. My chest tightened. It wasn't a wedding invitation, at least not in print. My own sister's name stood on the card as if this were just another public event. No mention of family, no warmth. I told myself there had been a mistake. Maybe her assistant handled the printing. Maybe the foundation branding was just for show. But deep down, I knew it wasn't an error. It was deliberate, polished humiliation wrapped in calligraphy. As I stepped through the glass doors, cool air and perfume swept over me. Crystal chandeliers shimmered like icicles above hundreds of guests dressed in shades of champagne and silver. I adjusted the strap of my dress and reminded myself to breathe. Every step echoed. Eyes flickered toward me, then away just as quickly. "Oh, Tess," a woman said, my aunt, I think, though we hadn't spoken in years. "You look different." Different. Not beautiful, not happy, just different. She smiled that brittle, polite smile people use when they're afraid pity might be contagious. I nodded and kept walking, clutching the envelope until the corners bit into my palm. The scent of lilies filled the air, sweet and heavy, mixing with the clink of champagne glasses and murmurs of small talk. I spotted Valora across the ballroom. Her gown shimmered in soft light, the same pale gold she used to say made her feel like sunlight. People surrounded her, co-workers, old friends, her new in-laws. When her eyes met mine, she didn't smile. She turned back to her guests, as if she hadn't seen me at all. I swallowed hard and made my way to the table marked with my name. It was near the restroom doors, tucked behind a pillar where the waitstaff came and went. My card read Tessa Dare, donor. I stared at that last word until the letters blurred. Not sister, not maid of honor, just donor. A young server passed by with a tray of shrimp cocktails and gave me an apologetic smile. I managed one in return. Inside, something burned quietly. They planned this. They want me to see where I belong. Still I stayed. Maybe staying was the only form of defiance I had left. Across the room, laughter rippled from Valora's table. I tried not to listen but caught fragments of conversation. Someone mentioned the charity, someone else the honeymoon in Greece. Every so often, my sister's hand would rise gracefully in the air, her engagement ring catching the light, blinding in its certainty. A memory tugged at me, the two of us as children on the beach, building castles from wet sand. She always took the bigger half, the prettier shells. I didn't mind back then. I thought that was what love looked like, giving until you disappeared. The music softened. A tap on the microphone pierced the chatter. Paxton, Valora's new husband, stood at the stage. He was the kind of man whose smile always looked rehearsed. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice smooth as the champagne he held. "Before we continue, I'd like to thank everyone who made this night possible, especially my wonderful wife and the Adair family for their support over the years." A wave of polite applause swept through the crowd. I clapped once, maybe twice. Paxton chuckled. "Now, families are funny things. Not everyone can be a blessing. Some are just along for the ride. Right, Tess?" The words hit me like ice water. Laughter scattered across the tables, uncertain, testing the edges of cruelty. My stomach turned. I forced a smile, though my lips trembled. My fingers tightened around the stem of my glass until I felt it bend. The music stopped. Silence. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Then I heard her. Valora's voice, sweet and sharp as glass. "Get out, Parasite." My body froze. My pulse hammered in my ears. drowning everything else. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered my name. But no one told her to stop. I turned toward her. She was radiant under the chandelier, rage disguised as righteousness. The people beside her looked anywhere but at me. "Did you hear me?" she said, still smiling for the crowd. "You don't belong here." My throat burned, but I refused to cry. Instead, I set my glass down, smoothed the fabric of my dress, and nodded once. "All right," I said softly. "I'll leave." Each step toward the door felt like wading through quicksand. The ballroom blurred behind me. Faces I'd known my whole life suddenly strangers. When I reached the hallway, the cool air hit my face. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until then. My hands shook, and I leaned against the marble wall. Through the doors, laughter resumed, quieter now, uneasy. I wanted to scream. Instead, I straightened my back. "You wanted me gone, Valora. Congratulations." I started toward the exit, my heels clicking on the polished floor. Then, behind me, the door swung open again. "Tess!" That voice, deep, familiar. I turned. Rowan stood in the doorway, breathless, tie loosened, eyes scanning the crowd before landing on me. Confusion flashed across his face, then anger as he saw the tears I hadn't managed to wipe away. "What happened?" he asked, stepping closer. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The noise from the ballroom spilled out, the laughter, the music resuming like nothing had happened. "Nothing," I said finally, my voice breaking only once. "You're just late." He reached for my hand. "Tess, talk to me." But the words wouldn't come. Not yet. Behind him, the chandelier light flickered, and I saw Valora at her table again, laughing like she'd already won. Something shifted inside me then, small, steady and sharp. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And as Rowan's grip tightened around my fingers, I realized he had just walked into something far bigger than a wedding. He'd walked into a war. But if they thought I'd break again, they'd forgotten who I'd become. The echo of Valora's voice still hung in the ballroom air when Rowan's footsteps reached me. He wasn't supposed to be here yet. His meeting in San Diego was supposed to keep him away until morning. But there he was, striding through the doorway like a gust of clean wind, cutting through perfume and champagne. The room shifted. Conversations faltered. Glasses hovered midair. My sister's laughter trailed off like a record needle lifting too soon. Rowan looked immaculate, dark suit, crisp collar, a quiet authority that made people instinctively move aside. He didn't rush. He simply walked toward me, eyes locked on mine, and when he reached me, he placed a hand at the small of my back. It wasn't just affection. It was a declaration. "Tess," he said softly, voice edged with calm steel. "You okay?" I managed a nod, my throat still raw from humiliation. His eyes flicked past me to Valora, who stood frozen near the center table, her wine glass trembling slightly. Rowan turned fully toward the room. "Who just called my wife a parasite?" His tone wasn't loud, but it carried, low, steady, impossible to ignore. A wave of whispers spread through the guests. One man near the buffet whispered, "That's Dr. Rowan Elridge Harris Regional Board." And just like that, the air changed. The same people who'd laughed moments earlier straightened their posture, uncertain of where to look. Paxton tried to chuckle, stepping forward. "Hey, let's not make this awkward. You know how weddings can get. People drink, jokes fly, nerves." Rowan's gaze cut him off. "That wasn't a joke." Valora's painted smile twitched. "You're misunderstanding," she said, her voice syrupy. "It was taken out of context." "No," I said before Rowan could respond. "You meant it." My words came out even, controlled, every syllable sharp as glass. "You all meant it." A few heads turned, uncomfortable. My aunt reached for her glass, as if wine could wash away guilt. Valora blinked rapidly, her composure cracking. "Tess, you're overreacting. You know how sensitive you can be." "Don't," I cut in. "Not tonight." The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that pressed down on everyone's shoulders. For the first time in my life, my sister didn't have an answer ready. Rowan didn't speak. He didn't need to. He stood beside me, quiet but unmovable, and that was enough. His presence was gravity, anchoring me where I stood, reminding me I wasn't alone. Valora cleared her throat and gestured toward the band. Maybe we should get back to the music, she said weakly. This night's supposed to be about love. Then act like it, Rowan said. His hand stayed on my back, warm and steady. The guests began murmuring again, unsure whether to stay seated or leave the battlefield of glances and forced smiles. Someone at the bar muttered, "This family's always been a show." I breathed in slowly, the faint smell of lilies now sickly sweet. Paxton's face turned the color of wilted roses. "We didn't mean any harm," he mumbled, looking at his shoes. "You know how words get twisted." "Only when they're twisted to begin with," I replied. He opened his mouth to respond but couldn't. The room had gone quiet again. Then Rowan spoke, softer this time. "You don't owe them your silence, Tess." His words unlocked something inside me. I'd spent years letting them rewrite me, shrinking myself to fit their comfort. But not tonight. I met Valora's eyes. "You wanted everyone to see me crawl away, to confirm the story you've told about me since we were kids, that I was the needy one, the mistake, the hanger-on." Valora's jaw tightened. "You always make yourself the victim." I smiled, small tired. "No, you just can't stand when I stop playing the part." Rowan shifted slightly closer, a silent show of support. That was when Paxton tried again to play host. "All right, folks, let's move past this. Let's toast the happy couple, huh?" No one lifted their glass. The awkwardness spread like a crack through glass. A few guests whispered excuses and slipped toward the exit. The jazz trio began playing again, offbeat, unsure. I turned toward Rowan. "We should go." He nodded but didn't move. "Or," he said quietly, "we stay." "Your call." I hesitated. Every instinct screamed to leave, but something stronger whispered to stay. Flashback, 2 months earlier. Valora's voice over the phone, polite, firm, rehearsed. "We don't want to make things uncomfortable, Tess. Maybe it's best if you and Rowan sit this one out." I laughed then, pretending it didn't sting. "Of course. Wouldn't want to ruin your big day." After I hung up, Rowan found me at the kitchen table, fingers tapping the envelope of their invitation. He leaned against the counter. "You don't have to go." "I know," I'd said, tracing the embossed letters. "But if I don't, they'll say I'm bitter." He studied me a long moment. "Then I'll show up when it matters most." I hadn't known what he meant, until now. Back to the present. Rowan's hand slipped into mine. "You decide," he said quietly enough that only I could hear. "We can walk out now, or we can burn their whole narrative to the ground." I looked around the room, the people who'd smiled while I was humiliated, the sister who'd once braided my hair and whispered secrets under the blanket fort we built as kids. Valora's eyes dared me to run. Instead, I lifted my chin. "We stay," I said. "I want them to see what it looks like when the parasite doesn't crawl away." Rowan's smile was small, proud, and full of quiet fury. "Then we stay." We walked back into the ballroom together. Heads turned. The band tried to pick up tempo, but no one danced. The air had changed. Every word now carried weight. Every look had consequence. Valora's voice trembled as she thanked the guests for being part of this special evening. But her eyes stayed on me the entire time, watchful, calculating. Rowan leaned close and murmured, "She's already planning her next move." I didn't need to look to know he was right. I could feel it, the cold current beneath her polite tone. Still, I smiled for the cameras. If she wanted a performance, she'd get one. But this time, I'd write the script. As the night dragged on, Valora avoided me, whispering to Paxton and a few guests who'd chosen her side. I stayed near the edge of the dance floor, talking with an elderly neighbor who'd always liked me. Rowan stayed within reach, watching every shift in the crowd. When the last toast ended, Valora approached, glass in hand. "Tess," she said smoothly, "you really should learn when to leave quietly." I looked her dead in the eye. "You really should learn when to stop underestimating me." Her smile faltered, and she turned away, muttering something to Paxton. That moment, small as it was, felt like oxygen after years of drowning. Later, as the lights dimmed and guests began to leave, Rowan and I stepped outside. The night air was cool against my skin, the ocean dark and steady beyond the terrace. He slipped his jacket over my shoulders. "You did good," he said. I exhaled slowly. "No, we did." For the first time that evening, I let myself smile, real, tired, defiant. But behind us, through the glass doors, Velora stood watching, her reflection fractured by candlelight. Her expression wasn't anger anymore. It was calculation. And though I didn't know it yet, that was the moment she decided I had to be erased again. The clink of silverware filled the silence Velora left behind. Her smile lingered in the air like cheap perfume, sweet, suffocating, impossible to escape. I could feel her watching me from across the ballroom, that same look she used to give when she caught me wearing one of her sweaters as a teenager. Possession, not affection. She didn't need to speak. Her stare was a dare. I met her gaze, just long enough to let her know I saw her. Then I looked away. My pulse steadied against Rowan's hand resting over mine. We sat at the far end of the hall, away from the dance floor, under the flicker of candlelight that couldn't decide whether to shine or fade. The music picked up again, but no one was listening. Conversations restarted in whispers. You could feel the tension crawl along the walls, like static before a storm. At the main table, my mother, Sybil, sat straight-backed, hands folded neatly in her lap. She hadn't said a word all night, not when Velora humiliated me, not when Rowan demanded answers, not even now. She simply watched, her face unreadable. That silence. I'd known it my whole life, the kind that pretends to be peace but feels like betrayal. I used to believe my mother's quiet was love, that she stayed silent to keep the family together. But the older I got, the more I understood. Silence wasn't neutral. It was a choice, and her choice had never been me. Rowan leaned closer, voice low enough for only me to hear. She's waiting for you to flinch. I know, I whispered, but I'm not 17 anymore. And just like that, memory dragged me backward. Rain on asphalt, a porch light flickering, the smell of wet earth clinging to the air. I was 17 the night I left for good. It had been another dinner, another round of Velora's perfect stories. She was applying to Stanford, and the table was full of her cheerleaders, Mom, Dad Paxton, and a family friend who'd written one of her glowing recommendation letters. I'd come home late from my part-time job at the diner, still wearing my apron, hair pulled back, shoes soaked from the storm outside. Velora looked up, all smiles. Oh, Tess, we were just talking about you. I should have known what that meant. Paxton grinned, swirling his wine. Yeah, apparently your sister forgot to mail Velora's second recommendation form. I froze. What are you talking about? She left it in her backpack, Velora said, her voice breaking perfectly, just enough to sound hurt, not cruel. I found it after the deadline. That's not true, I said quickly. I dropped it at the post office the same day. I even have the... Enough, Sybil said quietly, setting her fork down. The tone wasn't angry, it was final. We can't keep doing this, Tess. Doing what? My throat felt raw. Telling the truth. Velora sighed dramatically, wiping a non-existent tear. You're always so defensive. Paxton leaned back, watching like it was theater. Some people just can't stand seeing others succeed. It's sad, really. Paxton, I said, trembling, you don't even know me. He smiled thinly. Oh, I think I do. You're the one who keeps bringing drama into every room. It was then I realized there was no winning. Not in that house. Not with them. I remember looking at my mother, begging her, silently, to step in. To say something, anything. But she just stared at her plate. Finally, she said, We can't protect you anymore, Tess. I didn't cry then. I didn't scream. I just stood up, walked to my room, and packed a duffel bag. The rain outside was relentless, slanting sideways, soaking through my jacket before I reached the end of the driveway. No one followed. No one told me to come back. And that was the night I stopped expecting them to. The ballroom faded back into focus, the murmur of voices, the faint rhythm of a jazz piano, the metallic taste of old memories. I looked down at my glass of water, watched the condensation slide down like raindrops on that old porch light. Rowan squeezed my hand gently. You're somewhere else, he said. I admitted, just remembering what it feels like to leave. He didn't press. He never did. That's what made him different. The first time we met, I was working at a coffee shop in San Diego. He was grading papers at the counter, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, looking like he'd been awake for days. He ordered black coffee. No sugar, no cream, and stayed for hours, sometimes with a medical journal, sometimes just staring out the window. We didn't talk much at first. Then one afternoon, he noticed me sketching on a napkin during my break. "You draw storm clouds a lot," he said, his voice warm but curious. I laughed. "They're easier than people." He nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe, but people are worth the harder sketches." That was the first time anyone had said something kind without expecting me to shrink in return. A few weeks later, he asked me to dinner. I told him I wasn't good at dating. He said, "Good. Neither am I, makes it fair." And when I finally told him about my family, the lies, the exile, the unspoken shame, he didn't try to fix it. He just listened. "You don't know what they're capable of," I'd said once, half warning, half confession. Rowan had smiled softly. "Then let me be the person who is." That night, I realized love didn't have to feel like walking on broken glass. It could be quiet, solid, and safe. Now, years later, sitting beside him under a chandelier that threw fractured light across the table, I felt that same calm strength pulsing through his fingertips into mine. Valora raised her glass at the main table. "A toast," she said loudly, the room falling into expectant hush. "To strong family bonds, even with those who test them." A ripple of laughter. Then nervous. Rowan's hand tightened around mine, our fingers locked together beneath the tablecloth. My knuckles ached, but I didn't pull away. I forced a smile, lifted my glass halfway, and let it hover there. Across the room, Sybil raised hers too. Our eyes met, her steady, mine defiant. For a moment, I thought I saw something flicker behind that composure. Regret, maybe. Or fear. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. The sound of glass clinking echoed through the hall. Valora's smile widened. "After all," she continued, "family always finds its balance, doesn't it?" I wanted to laugh. Balance. That was her word for control. For rewriting history until she looked holy and I looked ungrateful. I set my glass down. "Sometimes," I said evenly, loud enough for her to hear, "balance comes when the scale breaks." Her smile faltered. For the first time that night, she didn't have a clever reply. The band struck up a waltz. Guests began moving awkwardly toward the dance floor, eager to restore the illusion of normalcy. Rowan leaned toward me. "You handle that beautifully." "Maybe," I said, watching Valora spin under the lights. "But you see her face? She's already rewriting the ending." He looked at me with quiet understanding. "Then we write a better one." And for a brief moment, surrounded by the noise, the clinking glasses, and the ghosts of every old wound, I felt something dangerously close to peace. But peace in my family never lasted long. Because the silence that followed wasn't calm, it was the inhale before the next strike. I didn't know it yet, but that night's toast wasn't just a performance. It was a warning. And I just accepted my invitation to war. My feet moved on their own through the soft glow of string lights above the open-air terrace, while voices inside the wedding hall rose and dipped like a tide I was trying not to feel. I told myself it was still calm, that I was simply stepping away to breathe. But the quiet before something breaks usually arrives before the crack you can't ignore. At the drink station I found Valora, glass in hand and a perfect smile slipping slightly as I approached. She offered me a glass, sparkling wine this time, but I accepted water instead. I needed cold clarity. "This is your day," I said quietly. "Enjoy it, but one more public stunt like that, and I'll answer." I kept my voice even, my tone polite. There was power in restraint, a truth she couldn't shake off. She tilted her head. "Oh, Tess," always with the victim act, still desperate to be relevant. The words cut through my calm like shards of cold glass. I nodded slowly and walked away, not in fear, but because I was preparing. Back at our table, Rowan watched me. He didn't overreact, didn't whisper or glare. His silence was his strength. "Should I step in?" he asked softly, concern plain in his voice. "Not yet," I said, not looking up. "This is still my battle." He placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder and let it stay there. I remembered what he once told me. "You don't need to burn them. Just let them stand in the fire they lit." The flash of memory arrived. College graduation day. Valora next to me in a cap and gown, smiling as though the world was hers. A professor shook her hand, then turned to me with an apologetic glance. I was second place. Again. I remembered being told I was generous but unfocused, while she was driven by purpose. I recall handing my job offer letter to Mom and Dad, only to find it shredded into pieces later, Velora's way of saying I didn't matter. The music inside slowed for a moment. I sensed the shift before I heard it. Velora tapped her glass gently. "If I may," she began, voice bright and casual. "Let's raise a glass to the people who couldn't succeed on their own, so they married up." Laughter erupted. A few guests clapped politely, others looked away. My mother lifted her glass, eyes steady. I held Rowan's hand under the table, knuckles white. My heart felt cold and fierce. I rose from my chair quietly, the candles flickering in the distance. I didn't storm out, I walked away. I found a corridor beyond the guest rooms, marble floor, warm lighting, the murmur of staff carrying trays past the entrance. I leaned against the wall, took a deep breath, allowed the familiar sting of betrayal to settle around me. "Not this time," I whispered. A snapshot of the past jolted forward. I was 19 again, seated at the kitchen counter while Velora ripped up the letter I'd waited for, an executive assistant position at the medical group I loved. "You'll just embarrass us," she said. "Go find your place with the waitstaff." My mother sat there, head bowed, as if turning away shielded her from guilt. I closed my eyes. The corridor smelled of old brass and hotel polish, but through that I felt the summer evening slipping away, brown plant spaces outside and the muffled crash of waves beyond. I steadied my breathing. Rowan found me in the corridor doorway. "You okay?" He stepped closer. I leaned into him, glad for his quiet presence. "I will be," I said, "but I can't let it slide anymore." He nodded. "Then don't." I allowed myself a small smile. Not for Velora, not for my parents. For me. I returned to the hall, just as the band began to play again. The room was subdued now, edges blurred by the tension we had unmasked. I sat down but didn't raise my glass. I watched Velora. She was trying so hard to look unaffected, but her eyes flickered between me and our parents. Later, the lights dropped lower. Guests moved toward the dance floor. I remained at the table, lost in thoughts that were no longer silent. I thought about the years I asked myself if I was simply unwanted. I asked myself if I was wrong to stay, wrong to love a place that never loved me back. A waitress passed and asked if I needed anything. I shook my head. I didn't need comfort. I needed resolution. Velora floated past, her perfume thick in the air. She paused, leaned close. "You're too serious, Tess," she whispered. "Relax and enjoy." Her tone was condescending, a mask for something uglier. I looked her in the eye. "You're too confident," I replied softly. "That's the part you should worry about." Her lips tightened. She didn't respond. She didn't need to, because everyone watching understood. And then the punch came. She raised her glass again. "Here's to the people who think they matter when they don't." Her voice was loud this time. The hall gasped. I met her stare again. My fingers curled around Rowan's hand. I squeezed lightly. This wasn't just a toast, it was a declaration. Rowan leaned in and murmured, "Time to strike." I swallowed once. "Let's give them the evidence," I said. "Let's play by the rules they ignored." And as I pressed my lips to the rim of my water glass, I realized the tide had turned. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was coming for justice. But the endgame hadn't played out yet. Because this time, I didn't bring excuses, I brought proof. The air outside was heavier than before, thick with salt from the ocean breeze, and the kind of silence that follows humiliation. The music from the ballroom leaked faintly through the glass doors behind us, soft jazz, laughter trying to stitch over what had already torn. Rowan opened the passenger door for me, and I slid into the seat. The car smelled faintly of his cologne and the paper I had tucked away for years. He didn't ask questions. He just sat beside me waiting. The low hum of the wedding behind us was fading. We could still see the reflection of chandeliers flickering on the car's windshield. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the old manila folder, creased, faded, held together with a strip of duct tape. It had followed me through every move, every job, every new beginning. I placed it on my lap, fingers trembling slightly. Rowan glanced at it and smiled faintly. "You brought it." "I told you I wouldn't come unarmed," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. When I opened it, the faint smell of old paper filled the car, memories sealed in ink and dust. Inside were letters, certificates, folded photographs, proof of a life they'd tried to erase. At the top of the pile was my college acceptance letter, yellowed at the edges, addressed to Tess McAuliffe. Beneath it, report cards. Perfect grades they said weren't good enough. Then photographs from a community food drive I organized senior year, the one Valora had taken credit for when she applied for her scholarship. Rowan's eyes softened as he turned the papers slowly. You kept the receipts all this time. They said I was worthless, I murmured. I needed proof for when I stopped believing them. He exhaled, quiet admiration threading his tone. You never stopped believing, not really. You just learned to hide it. I smiled faintly. Maybe. I traced a finger over the college letterhead. But tonight, hiding isn't helping anyone. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The soft rumble of the ocean below the cliff filled the silence. Somewhere in the distance, a gull cried out, and the sound of laughter floated faintly from the terrace, Valora's, bright and brittle. Rowan reached for my hand. You ready? Almost, I said, closing the folder carefully. Just one more thing. He nodded and stepped out of the car, pulling his phone from his pocket. The car's interior light cast his reflection against the window as I watched him walk a few yards away toward the edge of the parking lot. His voice was calm, low, deliberate. Yes, he said into the phone. This is Dr. Rowan Elridge. I think you'll want to hear something before your board meets next week. I could only hear fragments. His tone was measured but firm. She's a founder, he said at one point. The actual founder of the Harris Regional Food Initiative. Yes, she never said a word all these years because she didn't want to ruin her family's reputation. A pause. Then quieter. But now they're using her name again without consent. You're still sponsoring the McAuliffe Clinic, right? You might want to review who signed the founding documents. I felt a chill spread through me. Not fear, but the recognition of power shifting. Slowly. Finally. When Rowan returned, I looked at him. You didn't have to do that. I did, he said simply. You've been surviving on silence long enough. We sat there a moment longer, the folder between us like a loaded truth. The air was cooler now. The sun had sunk completely, leaving the horizon brushed in indigo. Let's go back, I said finally. I'm done hiding. Rowan nodded once, and we stepped out together. The noise of the ballroom returned like static as soon as we walked through the doors. Laughter, chatter, the faint scrape of forks against plates. I spotted Valora at the main table, perfectly poised, a champagne flute raised mid-gesture. She saw us immediately. Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes sharpened. I didn't sit this time. I walked straight to the microphone near the stage, the same one she had used for her toast. Heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. I adjusted the mic slightly. My hand didn't shake. Sorry, I began, voice calm but clear. Just one more toast. A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd. Valora's jaw tensed. To the women, I continued, who were told they couldn't, and still did. A brief pause. Applause, hesitant but sincere. Faces turned toward me, some curious, others uncomfortable. I smiled, not for them but for myself. See, I said, when I was 17, I was told I wasn't college material. My acceptance letter was never opened. It was thrown away before I could even see it. The words hung in the air. Valora's smile froze mid-expression. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single page, unfolded and slightly torn at the corner. This, I said, is the letter. I held it up to the light, the seal of New York University visible under the chandelier. Gasps spread across the room. I heard someone near the back whisper, she had proof. I kept speaking. That letter was mine. But someone decided my future was better served staying quiet, serving theirs instead. I looked directly at Valora. My mother forged my signature to decline the offer. She said, "You're needed here. Valora will go instead." And so she did. Valora stood now, pale and trembling slightly. "That's a lie," she snapped, her voice pitched too high. "No," I said evenly. "It's documented, because I kept copies. Every form, every rejection that wasn't mine to carry." Behind her, Sybil, the woman who'd given me life but not protection, stared at the floor, fingers clutching her wineglass, so tightly I thought it might break. I continued, voice steady but full of quiet conviction. For years, I thought silence made me stronger. But silence only protects the liar. The projector behind the stage flickered to life. Rowan, who'd slipped away a minute earlier, had connected my laptop. On the screen appeared a scan of the letter, postmarked, dated, unmistakably addressed to me. Then, another image, the signature page. The decline form, signed not by me but by Sybil McAuliffe. Gasps turned into murmurs. Someone dropped a glass. Valora's lips parted in disbelief. How did you even get that? I smiled faintly. You forget, I was the one who used to file your paperwork. The silence that followed was electric. I turned from her and looked out at the guests. Family, friends, people who'd heard only one version of who I was. For a long time, I thought I was nothing without their approval. But I've built a life they couldn't destroy. A degree they said I'd never earn. A career they said didn't exist. And a marriage built on truth, not performance. Rowan stepped forward from the crowd, his presence quiet but grounding. His hand found mine. Here's to the women who were told they couldn't, I said again, raising my glass, and still did. The applause was real this time, muted, cautious, but genuine. I saw faces softening, others turning away in discomfort. But I didn't care who clapped. This wasn't for them. Valora sat down slowly, her expression unraveling. My mother remained frozen, eyes unfocused, glass untouched. The band didn't start again right away. For a moment, there was only the sound of my own breathing, steady and sure. And then I realized something. I wasn't here to disrupt their wedding. I was here to reclaim mine. The applause from my toast hadn't even faded when the sound of heels cut through the hum of conversation. Valora! I didn't need to turn. I could feel her energy, the heat of anger dressed as confidence, the sharp click of a woman who believed she still held the stage. She swept up to the microphone, her wedding gown glittering under the lights like a blade wrapped in silk. You always were desperate for attention, Tess, she said, voice sweet enough for the cameras but sour enough for me. Isn't it enough that you tricked some man into marrying you? You don't have to ruin my day, too. The room gasped. Someone dropped a fork. Another whispered, Oh my God, I caught sight of phones being raised discreetly, people recording, pretending they weren't. Even the band stopped mid-note. I stood motionless. The old version of me would have cried or run, but not this one. I waited for her to finish, for the echo of her cruelty to settle like dust. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, too calm. You're right, Valora. I did come here with something to say. The crowd quieted. My heart pounded, but my tone didn't waver. I came with an invitation. I came with dignity, and I've been met with public humiliation. Again. You want to call me a parasite? I paused, looking her directly in the eyes. Be careful. Some parasites learn to survive everything. The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear the faint whir of the air conditioner, the distant crash of waves outside. Rowan rose slowly from our table. He didn't rush toward me. He didn't grab the mic. He just stood there, steady as a lighthouse in a storm. Enough, he said quietly. Valora's mouth opened, but no sound came. I turned toward her, not angry now, just done. You've used my name, my work, my life as material for your image. But this ends tonight. I reached into my purse, fingers brushing the smooth paper inside. My hands didn't shake this time. When I pulled out the white envelope, the light caught it, and a ripple of curiosity moved through the room. This, I said clearly, is the last time I'll speak to you like this, Valora. Her smile flickered, the first sign of fear breaking through her mask. I'm giving you 24 hours, I continued, to issue a formal apology, publicly and in writing. If you don't, this goes to the board, the licensing board, and the media. You know what you forged. Gasps broke out across the tables. People turned to each other, whispering rapidly. The word forged carried weight. It didn't belong in family arguments, and everyone knew it. Valora's face drained of color. She took a step forward, her voice shaking now. You wouldn't dare. I already did, I said softly. The call's been made. I could see realization dawning on her. She glanced instinctively toward Rowan, who was watching her without expression. Her lips parted, but whatever defense she meant to offer never found its way out. The room had split, half the guests watching me, half pretending to eat though no one touched their food. Someone whispered, "What did she forge?" Another voice, "Wait, is this about the clinic?" Aunt Lydia, my father's cousin, muttered under her breath, "I told you those girls were trouble." I ignored them all. My focus was on Velora, who stood frozen, her knuckles white around the microphone. "You built a clinic on lies," I said. "You used my credentials, my research, my name. You forged documents to make it look like your work. And for years I stayed quiet because I thought protecting the family mattered more than the truth." I let the words settle, then added, "But family doesn't bury your future. It doesn't steal your name." Her voice cracked. "You can't prove any of that." "Oh, I can," I said, holding up the envelope. "And I will, unless you fix this yourself." The crowd was utterly still now. The staff at the buffet had stopped serving. I could feel eyes from every direction, the prickle of judgment and awe mixing in equal measure. Rowan moved beside me, but didn't interfere. He knew this was mine. He was simply there, my anchor in the storm. Velora's expression hardened again, pride trying to reassemble itself. "You're jealous," she said, but the words landed weakly. "You always have been. You hate seeing me happy." I laughed quietly. "No, Velora. I hate watching you lie." For a moment, I almost pitied her. Almost. At the far end of the table, Sybil lifted her wineglass again, her defense mechanism, her shield. Her eyes didn't meet mine. I realized then that she wouldn't intervene even now. She never would. I looked around the room, taking in the faces, some familiar, some barely remembered. "For those of you wondering," I said, "this isn't about revenge. It's about correction. For too long, my story was told by people who couldn't stand that it wasn't theirs. So here's the truth, unpolished, unedited, and documented." I placed the envelope gently on the table beside the microphone. "Everything in here is real. Emails, forms, copies of signatures. You know what's in them, Velora. You know exactly how much you took." The color drained completely from her face. The audience began to shift uncomfortably. Chairs scraped against the floor. Someone coughed. And then, as if the tension were too much to bear, a few guests stood and quietly left. A cousin leaned toward another and whispered, "She's not bluffing." The reply came fast. "No, she never does." Velora's chest rose and fell rapidly. "You're humiliating me in front of everyone," she hissed. I tilted my head slightly. "Now you know how it feels." Her jaw clenched. For once, she didn't have a comeback. The silence stretched, taut and electric. Even the band had gone still. The only sound was the faint buzz of a chandelier bulb flickering overhead. Rowan stepped closer, his voice low enough for only me to hear. "You did what you came to do." I nodded. My pulse had slowed, replaced by a strange calm. Power, not the cruel kind my family wielded, but the quiet certainty of truth, settled over me like armor. Velora didn't move. She just stared, and behind the fury in her eyes, I saw something new, fear. Not of exposure, but of losing control. "You'll regret this," she whispered finally. "I already did," I said, turning away. That's why I stopped. The clinking of glasses began again, awkward and uncertain. People pretended to resume their meals, but every eye followed me as Rowan and I walked back toward our table. I could feel the whispers ripple outward, like tiny aftershocks following an earthquake. "What did she forge?" someone muttered near the front. "Wasn't that clinic supposed to be a non-profit?" "I think she used her sister's credentials," another voice replied. My phone buzzed once. A text from my cousin Mara. "Something's about to go down. Be careful." I looked across the room at Velora. She was seated again, motionless, her expression blank but her mind clearly spinning. The microphone lay abandoned beside her untouched dinner. And for the first time in years, she didn't have the last word. Velora didn't speak again that night, but her silence was louder than anything she had ever said. The clinking of silverware had barely resumed when I felt it, the tremor of something coming, the kind of quiet you recognize before a storm. Velora hadn't said another word all night, but her silence wasn't surrender. It was calculation. The servers began bringing out the dessert trays, creme brulee, lemon tarts, coffee service on rolling carts. The chatter in the room grew again, cautious but relieved, people pretending that the evening might finally smooth itself out. I wanted to believe that too, but I knew her. Valora never accepted defeat. She plotted around it. I excused myself from the table, stepping toward the terrace doors for air. The sun had sunk completely now, leaving the horizon painted in a deep violet wash. The ocean below sounded restless. I breathed in the salt air, trying to quiet the pounding in my chest. When I turned back toward the ballroom, I saw her standing by the projector screen. She had a remote control in her hand, the same one the wedding coordinator had used earlier for the slideshow of their engagement photos. My stomach dropped. "Ladies and gentlemen," Valora's voice rang out, smooth and bright. "Before we continue dessert, I thought we could share a few memories." A hush fell over the crowd. I froze halfway to my seat. The lights dimmed slightly as the screen flickered to life. At first, it looked like a normal slideshow, childhood photos, family gatherings. But then the images changed. It was me. Me, at 19, in my college dorm. Me, at a protest in San Diego holding a cardboard sign, hair a mess, face half hidden behind sunglasses. Me, in a graduation gown, standing awkwardly at the edge of a group I hadn't been invited into. Each image bore a small caption, typed in bold white letters. "The real Tess McAuliffe." Then another, always playing the victim. A murmur spread through the room. Some guests looked confused, others uncomfortable. A few older relatives chuckled, the kind of laughter that grows from cruelty, not humor. Valora smiled sweetly. "Let's not forget where we came from," she said. My knees nearly buckled. It wasn't the photos, they weren't shameful. It was the invasion. Those images had been stored privately on an external hard drive, one I hadn't used in years. I took a slow step forward. "Turn it off," I said, my voice low but firm. Valora tilted her head, pretending to misunderstand. "Oh, Tess, come on. These are just memories. Family history." "They were stolen," I said. "You don't have access to that drive." She shrugged. "You should have protected your files better." "Don't worry, everyone's seen worse." The audacity in her tone made several guests shift uncomfortably. The laughter had stopped entirely now. Someone whispered, "That's crossing the line." Before I could respond, Rowan stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Valora," he said evenly, "where did you get those?" She ignored him, clicking to the next slide, a photo of me, younger, sitting on the curb outside our parents' house, crying. I remember that day. I had just found out I wasn't going to college after all. The crowd gasped. Rowan walked toward the stage, pulling his phone from his pocket. "You might want to stop this," he said, calm but lethal. "Because what you're doing right now is a felony." Valora's smile faltered for the first time. He held up his phone, the blue light reflecting in his eyes. "See, I have the digital logs. Those photos were pulled from a private backup, one protected under my wife's name. The access came from your IP address this morning. That's data theft, Valora." The murmurs became an audible buzz. People were whispering, pointing, shifting in their seats. I heard phrases floating around me. "Is that true?" "Wait," she broke in. "That's illegal, right?" Valora's face went rigid. "You're bluffing." Rowan's voice was smooth, terrifyingly calm. "No, I'm not. And the timestamp screenshots are already sent to my attorney." I took a breath, finally stepping beside him. "You broke into my storage account." My voice trembled, but it wasn't fear, it was fury. "That's federal, Valora. You didn't just try to humiliate me, you committed a crime." Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an ally. No one spoke. Even Sybil looked down at her plate. My father stared into his drink, shoulders slumped. "You've gone too far," I said quietly. "And now you're going to live with what you've done." Valora laughed, but it came out strangled. "What? You're going to see your own family?" I looked at her evenly. "Already did." A collective gasp swept through the room. 3 days ago," I continued, "I filed a defamation and privacy violation suit. I gave you every chance to make this right quietly, but you wanted an audience." The sound of forks and glasses stilled again. The crowd leaned in. Today wasn't just a wedding, I said, my tone calm, deliberate. It was a test of character. And every single one of you just saw the results. Valora's lawyer uncle, the family's self-appointed fixer, shot up from his chair. Valora, he hissed. We need to talk. Now. He grabbed her arm, but she yanked it away, eyes blazing. Don't you dare, she snapped. I'm not the villain here. She's manipulating all of you, she always has. Her voice cracked mid-sentence. I met her eyes and said softly, the only person you're manipulating is yourself. The screen behind her went dark. The wedding coordinator, God bless her, had finally unplugged the projector. The silence in the room was suffocating. Valora stood there, breathing hard, her perfect curls trembling against her shoulders. That's when I heard my father's voice. Enough! It was quiet, gravelly, older than I remembered. He pushed his chair back slowly and stood. Valora, he said, what you did, we didn't raise you to be this cruel. Her eyes widened, as if she couldn't believe it. Dad! He shook his head. No, not tonight. Not anymore. For the first time in my life, he looked at me instead of through me. There was something in his expression I had never seen before, regret. Genuine, unfiltered regret. My mother looked like she might speak, but no words came. The illusion of control, the one that had defined this family for decades, was cracking right before everyone's eyes. Valora stepped back, shaking her head. You're all blind, she whispered. She's using you. But no one moved to defend her. Not a single person. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of years begin to lift. This isn't about revenge, I said, my tone quiet but steady. It's about truth. I've carried it alone long enough. Valora turned, her heels scraping against the floor, and stormed toward the exit. Cameras followed her, half the guests pretending not to film, the other half pretending to be shocked. As she disappeared into the hallway, I looked around the room, feeling my heartbeat slow. For the first time that night, I wasn't shaking. Rowan took my hand. It's over, he murmured. Not yet, I said softly, but it's beginning to be. Outside, the night air pressed cool against the windows. The waves below kept their rhythm, steady and relentless, like time, like truth. Because the truth doesn't end with regret. It demands accountability. The ballroom had grown so quiet that even the faint hum of the air vents sounded intrusive. People were still frozen in place, half-finished desserts melting on porcelain plates. I could feel eyes darting between me and the door Valora had stormed through, as if waiting for someone to announce that it was all some cruel misunderstanding. But this family didn't deal in misunderstandings. It dealt in cover UPS. I turned toward the large windows, their reflections fractured by candlelight. Beyond them, the ocean shimmered under a deep blue sky. The air outside the ballroom was cooler now, calmer, but inside, tension still crackled. That's when the sound of approaching footsteps broke through the murmurs. 2 men in dark suits entered the room. Not security, not hotel staff. They moved with quiet authority, scanning the room briefly before one of them lifted a folded document from inside his jacket. The older one spoke first. Valora McAuliffe! The entire room turned. Valora, who had just re-entered through the side door, face red, makeup streaked, pride hastily restitched, froze mid-stride. Yes, she said, her voice a brittle whisper. The younger officer stepped forward, calm and professional. Ma'am, you've been served. He handed her the document. The rustle of paper in that silent hall was deafening. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Valora blinked down at the paper, confusion flickering into disbelief, then horror. What is this? She demanded. Notice of pending civil action, the officer said evenly. Digital theft, falsification of records, and defamation. Someone near the back muttered, Oh, dear Lord. Valora's hand shook as she read. Then, suddenly, she laughed, a sharp, broken sound. This is absurd. You can't serve me here. It's my wedding. Ma'am, the older officer replied quietly, this is an official subpoena. We're only here to deliver it. The weight of those words hung over the room like a storm cloud. Tears began streaming down her face, but even in that moment, she looked around for allies. No one moved. Not her friends, not her bridesmaids, not even her parents. "This is her doing," she said, jabbing a finger in my direction. "She's been obsessed with ruining me since we were kids." I stood, calm, composed, the very picture of what she couldn't stand, a woman who refused to shatter. "No, Valora," I said softly. "I've been trying to survive you." The officers gave me a brief nod of acknowledgement, then turned and exited quietly, leaving behind the sound of her ragged breathing and the rustle of silk as she clutched her dress. I walked toward the center of the room, every eye following me. My voice didn't rise, but it carried. "I told you accountability was coming. I didn't expect it to happen here, but I guess truth has a sense of timing." Valora trembled, her composure unraveling. "You think this makes you righteous? You're still the same broken little girl who left home because she couldn't handle reality." "Reality?" I asked, stepping closer. "Reality is that you've spent your life rewriting mine." For a moment, she looked ready to lunge, but then she froze. Because I wasn't the only one approaching. From the far end of the hall, a figure stepped forward, gray hair, soft eyes. A presence that silenced even the whispers. "This is Mrs. Bonner," I said to the room. "She used to tutor us after school." Valora's face went pale. "No," she whispered. "Yes," Mrs. Bonner said gently. "And I think it's time I finally said what I saw." The murmurs rose again, an undercurrent of disbelief and curiosity. Mrs. Bonner's voice trembled, but her words were clear. "I taught both girls for 4 years. I saw how Tess was treated, how she was blamed for everything, even things she didn't do. I saw the way her letters disappeared, how her grades were tampered with, how every opportunity she earned was redirected toward Valora." Valora gasped, shaking her head. "You're lying. You're senile." But Mrs. Bonner only looked at her with pity. "I wish I were. But I kept notes, old ones. I still have the copies of the letters you and your mother intercepted." The crowd's energy shifted again, like the air before thunder. Someone whispered, "She has proof." Mrs. Bonner turned to me. "I'm ready to testify, Tess. I should have spoken sooner. I'm sorry." I nodded, my throat tightening. "Thank you," I whispered. Valora's mask cracked completely. "You can't do this," she said, voice rising. "You can't drag our family through the mud like this." Before I could answer, Rowan spoke. He'd been standing near the back, quiet, observant. But now, he walked toward her with a steadiness that made the room hold its breath. He stopped just a few feet from her. "You already did that yourself," he said simply. Valora turned to him, her expression pleading. "Rowan, you can't let her destroy everything. You're my husband." He looked at her for a long moment. "I thought marrying you would elevate me," he said softly, "but it's you who's beneath me now." He slipped off his wedding ring, looked at it once, then dropped it at her feet. The tiny metallic sound echoed through the room like a closing door. No one spoke. Valora stared at the ring, her face pale as porcelain, her hands trembling. "You can't just walk away," she cried. "I already have," he said, turning to me. His eyes softened. "You were right, Tess. Silence only protects the liar." He reached for my hand. I didn't resist. Behind us, Valora crumpled into a chair, sobbing into her hands. Her father stood beside her, eyes clouded with shame. My mother sat motionless, a statue of guilt. I watched them both, and for a moment I felt a pang of something unexpected. Not triumph, but grief. The kind that comes when a truth finally settles after years of denial. One by one, guests began to stand. Chairs scraped softly against the polished floor as they left the ballroom. No one said goodbye. No one offered comfort. The music had stopped completely. The wedding was over. As we stepped into the hotel lobby, the scent of lilies and champagne gave way to the crisp air of the night. Outside, the valet line had thinned, leaving only a few cars idling under the canopy lights. Rowan exhaled, rubbing his temples. "You did it," he said quietly. I nodded. No, she did it to herself. We walked toward the exit. Behind us, through the glass doors, I saw Valora's reflection, alone at the table where she'd once stood so tall. Her veil had slipped, her mascara streaked, her empire of lies crumbling in real time. For the first time, I didn't feel like running. I didn't need to. Justice doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it comes with silence. And as I stepped into the cool evening air, I knew one thing for certain: this wasn't just an ending. It was a reckoning. But endings are never that simple. Some wounds leave permanent scars. The car door closed softly behind me as I stepped through my front gate, the soft hum of the ocean distant but still familiar. 3 weeks had passed since the wedding, the one everyone thought would be about love and union, but for me, it had become a crucible. Inside the house, pale afternoon light spilled across the hardwood floor, and I paused at the threshold, clutching the envelope Rowan's mother had sent. When I opened it, the handwriting struck me. Neat, precise, with a hint of regret. It wasn't what I expected from her. No blame, no demands, just acknowledgement. Inside was a letter: "You deserve better. And I hope my son learns from this." My throat tightened. I folded it again, ran a finger over her signature. I wasn't sure whether it was closer to forgiveness or a farewell, but either way, it was something I had never had before. Someone's truth, quietly offered. Settling onto the sofa, I watched the news tickers roll across the screen. McAuliffe wedding fallout. Family feud goes public. Charity gala turns courtroom drama. The coverage was calamitous for Valora. Former allies were silent. One former sponsor released a statement: "We are reviewing our association." The paragraphs of denial and lip service unraveled faster than the wedding cake's frosting had melted. I didn't post. I didn't comment. I sat back and let the storm wash over them while I stayed still. At that moment, staying quiet was my power. No hashtags, no press release, no interviews. Just me, the letter, and the steady rhythm of truth settling in place. My son's laughter pulled me from the glow of the television. "Mom! Look!" he yelled from the backyard. I walked through the sliding door, bare feet on the patio, the fresh scent of lavender from the garden mingling with the briny breeze. My rose bushes had grown tall this season. I traced the petals with my fingertips, thinking of the days I believed they'd be trampled. "Can I plant these here?" he asked, holding up 2 small seedlings. I nodded. Absolutely. I knelt next to him, felt the soil crumble through my fingers. Cool, damp, real. I told him about starting over, about how sometimes roots grow quietly, unseen until they burst through the surface. "They tried to bury me," I said softly, "but they didn't know I was a seed." Rowan came out then, towel on his shoulder, working around the grill. He looked up and gave me a grin. "Garden's looking good." I smiled back, ease drifting into my shoulders for the first time in weeks. "It's our patch," I said. "Not theirs." Later that evening, I found a voicemail on my phone. Valora's number flashed. I pressed play. Her voice trembled, words falling in a rush. "Tess, please, can we meet? I never wanted this to go public, to look like this. I was scared. I don't know what to say." Something inside me shifted. Comfort whispered, "You could be the bigger person." But I remained seated, hand hovering over the phone. I didn't delete it then. I waited until I picked up the gardening gloves, until I pulled a weed from near the lavender. Then I opened the voicemail again, listened to her full apology, frail, unsteady, unfamiliar. I pressed the delete button. No sound but a soft slip. When Rowan asked if I'd spoken to her, I shook my head. "I don't forgive you," I said, "but I'm no longer your victim." The weekend arrived and we packed the car. He was headed to the coast for a couple of days, just him, me, and our son. No agendas, no family drama, no charity galas, no pre-recorded smiles. We drove under the wide California sky, the highway stretching ahead like a promise not yet made. I shifted in my seat, glanced at him, then our son reaching for songs in the playlist. The air smelled of salt and freedom. "That's enough proving yourself," Rowan said from the driver's side. "Now you just live it." I nodded, letting his words sink in. Proving something to them. My sister, my parents, the guests, had been exhausting. Claiming my own life felt easier. I looked out the window and saw the sunset melt behind distant hills. The day was turning to dusk, but for the first time I felt light instead of heavy. As we pulled into our vacation cottage for the weekend, I stepped onto the porch, watched the white wood railings glow in the soft twilight. I heard the waves gently lap at the shore, and I realized that this, right now, was peace. Imperfect, unhurried, honest. I still carried the wounds. I still carried the scars, but they didn't define me. They shaped me. And that, I realized, was the real victory, not their apology, but my peace. What this story reminds us is simple, yet powerful. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us the most are the ones who try hardest to silence us. But silence is not peace, and forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. When we speak up, when we choose truth over comfort, healing begins, not just for us, but for those quietly watching, waiting for someone to go first. Have you ever been treated unfairly by your own family? How did you respond? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice might be the one someone else needs to hear today. And if this story